opportunity for everyone that's on this call this morning to do a brief introduction. So in no particular order, if you could just state your name, the organization you represent, and perhaps just a brief overview of how your organization serves in the region, that would be great. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Mr. McKinney. Good morning, Mr. McKinney.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tom McKinney. I'm the CEO of Interfaith Community Services. We are a social service agency that works with people trying to get out of poverty, keeping seniors in their home, and feeding the community, I guess, is the best quick introduction. Thanks. Okay. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Great. Let's see. I see Tony Bruno.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tony Bruno. I'm with Valley Assistance Services. We work with people from as far south as Rio Rico and as far north as Pima Mine Road, including Sahuarita, Green Valley, Amado, Aravaca, Elephant Head, and other small communities in the surrounding area. We have 12 separate programs for seniors and families, as well as a transportation program. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate it. And then I see Kristen Bitgood, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Kristen Bitgood. I work for Pima County Community and Workforce Development, and specifically in business services. So I meet with employers, tell them about our programs, services, and grants that can assist them with workforce challenges.
Great, thank you. I'm happy to have you here today. And then I see Lisa Reams.
Good morning. So my name is Lisa Reams. I'm the Vice President for Programs for Pima Council on Aging. And Pima Council on Aging is the federal and state designated area agency on aging for all of Pima County. And we do a number of services for older adults age 60 plus, as well as adults with physical disabilities age 18 to 59 and their family caregivers.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you being here as well. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move forward with the next item on the agenda, just to make sure that we're cognizant of looping people in who might be joining somewhere in the midst of today's meeting. I will make an effort to kind of circle back and allow them that opportunity to introduce themselves as well. But we are going to try to stick as close to the agenda and the flow associated with it as possible. But obviously we want this to be a fruitful discussion of the items that are on the agenda. So I'm hopeful we can find the balance in accommodating those that might join us midstream, if you will. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and move to the second item on the agenda, which is the in-kind form. So regional planning efforts are enhanced by recording time donated by attendees, volunteers, and participants. And then PAG collects data on the time dedicated to meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants of federal dollars. So if you are paid with federal dollars, we ask that you let us know now, either by a show of hand using technology with the little raise hand icon, or you can verbally state it or send me an email stating that your salary is paid for either entirely or in part by federal dollars, so that we don't count it in our calculations. So if you could go ahead and do that now, that would be great. So if there's anyone whose position is paid for with federal dollars, either all or in part, we'll not count that in kind. So I see Lisa and I see Tony. Great. Is there anyone else?
I'm paid by Pima County, so I'm assuming that's, I don't know if that's state, if state's included in federal or not.
Okay, I'll make a note of that, Kristen. I appreciate that, and then we will double check on that and make sure we either count it or do not count it as appropriate. So thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. All right, so time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable of the agenda and meeting materials. And at the conclusion of this meeting, the session report will automatically calculate your time spent in this meeting. And then, of course, time spent working on PAG or RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. So that concludes our in-kind component. And I see, Lisa, your hand is still up. Did you have a question? Okay, all right, just want to make sure.
I
All
was
right,
just
thanks.
not on the spot there, sorry.
No, you're good. I wanted to make sure in case there was a clarifying question that you had. Great. All right, so I think just before we move to the next item on the agenda, I think I see we do have someone else who may have joined the call, so I want to be respectful to that person as well. So I see Carmen Johnson. Good morning, Carmen. If you could go ahead and just introduce yourself, your organization that you represent, and perhaps just a brief overview of how your organization serves in the region, that would be great. I don't know. Carmen, can you hear me? Okay. Carmen might not be able to hear me, so I'm gonna.
Janine, she just left the call, so she may have been having some issues.
We'll see if she rejoins. She might have. All right, so we will let Carmen have an opportunity to double check her technology and see if she can join the meeting a little bit more successfully, and then we'll allow for that introduction. So we're gonna just go ahead and move forward, and we'll accommodate as appropriate. So if we can move to agenda item number 3, which is the review of the funding amounts. So it's been a minute, so to speak, that we actually went through the funding amounts in their entirety. That was one of the first few things this subcommittee took a look at. And since we have different people on this call than were in some of the previous meetings, I shouldn't say call, meetings, I thought it would be appropriate, to make sure that we review them again for their benefit, but also we're getting ready to lean into making recommendations regarding these funding amounts. So I think it's appropriate to just take a look at it again and make sure everyone is aware of the different funding amounts and respective service intents so that we're all on equal footing and come to the table, so to speak, with a similar posture. So if we could go ahead and put up the different funding and service intents. Great. All right. So we're going to go through the funding and service intents, one broad service category, if you will, at a time. So we're going to start with the Department of Child Safety. And let me see if I can expand my screen here so I can read it better. Can everyone see this well on their screen? I'm hopeful everyone can see that. So I'm going to go ahead and go through these. So the services that fall under Department of Child Safety are going to be supportive and intervention guidance counseling for adults and children. And we are, of course, reviewing the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level, which has an amount of $34,602. And the service intents for that are to provide counseling and guidance for youth and adult domestic violence offenders due to increasing violence in the homes. And then, of course, the next one is supportive intervention guidance counseling. And then again, for the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level, the amount is $182,427. And the service intent for that particular service is to assist low-income children and families who are otherwise ineligible for state services to access available resources, services, and benefit programs effectively, including counseling for problem pregnancies. And then the next one is behavioral therapeutic activities, and the state fiscal year 2026 local planned level amount is $69,003. And the respective service intent for this particular service is to minimize the impact of the delays and problem behaviors by children with special needs, behavioral problems by providing learning assessment and support skills to childcare professionals in childcare facilities, behavioral therapeutic activities, including intervention and assistance to families, and childcare or preschool staff would be provided. So if we look at the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level for the Department of Child Safety, the cumulative amount is $286,031, if I'm reading that correctly on my screen there. So let me see if Carmen has joined. Yes, okay. So that summarizes that particular broad service category for Department of Child Safety with the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level amounts and the respective service intents. So as promised, I just want to circle back to Carmen Johnson and allow her to have an opportunity to introduce herself, state the organization she represents and how that organization serves in the region. And then we will move forward with the next broad service category. So good morning, Carmen. I don't know if you can hear me a little bit better this time, but if you could go ahead and introduce yourself, that would be great. Carmen, can you hear me? I'm not sure if Carmen can hear me, or maybe she can, but her audio is not working. So I'm going to ask my IT team if they could reach out to Carmen and see if there's a way perhaps we can support her on our end with another modality of sorts to be able to participate in the meeting more fully. So while we work on that, let's go ahead and move forward. And then if we need to accommodate in some way, we'll take a look at what that looks like. Right. So if we could look at the next one together, it is for the broad service category, Division of Aging and Adult Services, DAAS. And so you'll see that there's 3 services that we are going to briefly review for the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level. So the first is home care for elderly adults, personal care, housekeeping, home health, and shopper services. Clients are unable, or this is for clients who are unable to meet all the needs of maintaining a home in a safe and sanitary manner, or shop for their own food and have insufficient support systems, meaning family and friends, to assist them. And so when we look at the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level, the amount is $350,648. And the service intent for this is to enable clients to remain in their own homes by providing assistance with essential personal needs and in performing routine household maintenance, including shopping for basic needs, as well as reporting changes in client status. For case management, the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level is $348,022. And the service intent is to enable clients to remain in the least restrictive setting possible by providing care coordination, including assessment of needs, linkage to services and benefit programs, and effective utilization of available resources. And then the next one is home delivered meals. And the state fiscal year 2026 amount for the local plan level is $80,725. And so that, when we look at the District 2 totals, the cumulative amount is $779,395. And before we move to the next one, I just want to make sure that I didn't unintentionally cut off any of the language there on the service intents. So let me just check that really quickly. Just want to make sure I'm stating it accurately. Yes.
This is Carmen. I keep getting cut off, but I appreciate you giving me time to introduce myself and Catholic Community Services. We provide support to adults with developmental disabilities in vocational and housing, as well as many other agencies under the CCS umbrella to support people in our community, from seniors to people with disabilities. So thank you for giving me a little time. My internet connection is terrible.
It's okay. We understand. I think all of us have been there in some way, shape, or form. So it's fine. I'm glad it all worked out. That's the most important thing, that it all worked out. So appreciate you being here, Carmen. And just a quick qualifying question, since we did cover the in-kind, is any part of your salary or all of it paid by federal dollars?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. I appreciate that. All right. So just to kind of circle back on the case management for Division of Aging and Adult Services. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't cutting out a few words there. So down at the very bottom of the service intents, where it talks about enabling clients to remain in the least restrictive setting possible, it does say linkage to services and benefit programs and effective utilization of available. And I was correct that the next word is resources, but it's also followed by advocacy and continued monitoring. So I wanted to make sure that I was clear on that. So thank you for your patience and allowing me to double check that it wasn't cut off there on that slide there. All right, so I think we are here to move to the next broad service category, which is the Division of Community Assistance and Development, or DCAD. And there's quite a few services here and a variety of service intents that accompany it. So let's go ahead and look at them one at a time. So the first is supportive intervention, guidance, and counseling. And the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level amount is $24,766. And I'm going to go ahead and read it a little bit from my master slide, because it looks like this one's cut off a little bit at the top. So my apologies there. So just to help bridge that gap, I'm going to go ahead and read it. So the respective service intent for it is to provide crisis counseling and emergency shelter, followed by what you see on your screen, as well as assisting clients in stabilizing their situations and in accessing and other services and benefit programs. So that is the entirety of that service intent as provided by the Department of Economic Security. So crisis intervention shelter services, focusing on adults and domestic violence victims. The previous one was focused on adults and children. The state fiscal year 2026 local plan level is $63,580, and that's to provide emergency shelter to victims or potential victims of sexual assault or domestic abuse to prevent physical or emotional harm. The next one is case management services for adults or children for domestic violence victims. And the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level amount is $37,711. And the service intent for this is to assist victims of sexual abuse and domestic violence in obtaining safe and stable living situations and developing a case plan. All right, the next three are for legal assistance, but the service intents vary just a little bit in each of these. So I want to make sure that we take the time to look at those individually, much like we're looking at all the rest. You'll notice that the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level doesn't change too much between all three, but definitely doesn't change at all between two of them. So the first one is a legal assistance for adults, specifically domestic violence victims. And it's $19,216 is the local plan level for state fiscal year 2026. And for that particular service, the service intent is to protect the rights of individuals by providing assistance with civil legal issues for individuals and families in need of food stamp assistance. The next one is still legal assistance, and it's for civil legal matters for low-income residents. And the amount, again, for the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level is once again $19,216. But you'll see that the service intent is slightly different in that it is to protect the rights of individuals by providing consultation and legal services for individuals and families facing eviction or needing landlord-tenant mitigation. All right, and then the last legal assistance service is, again, civil legal matters for low-income residents. The state fiscal year or local plan level amount is just a little bit more. It's $28,565. But you'll see that the service intent associated with it is to protect the rights of individuals by providing assistance with civil legal issues, including domestic situations, landlord-tenant problems, and obtaining appropriate identification for government services. Right, so that concludes the 3 legal assistant services under this particular fraud service category. So the next is emergency shelter. And it's for adults and domestic violence victims. And you'll see that the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level is $53,128. And it is with the intent to provide immediate short-term shelter to persons who are without shelter or a fixed place of residence to prevent homelessness. All right, and then the last one is housing support services for both adults and children. And the state fiscal year local plan level for 2026 is $43,148. And the respective service intent is to prevent homelessness by providing services that focus on addressing immediate needs to keep persons at risk of becoming homeless in their current housing if possible, and by providing the necessary supports to maintain that housing or to locate new housing if necessary. Again, this is for both adults and children. All right, so the District 2 totals for this particular category, Division of Community Assistance and Development, DCAD, is $289,330 for state fiscal year 2026 local plan level. All right, so we will go ahead and move to the next broad service category, which is Workforce Development Administration, WDA. So when we look at this one, the services that it's speaking to is specifically employment services, and the target group is adults, which is really any individual 18 years of age and older. And for the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level, the amount is $41,708. And so when we look at the service intent, you'll see that there's quite a bit contained in this. So let's just kind of unpack it. It's to provide employment services such as childcare, transportation, employment screening, assessment or testing, structured job skills and job seeking skills, specialized therapy, such as occupational, speech, and physical therapy, special training and tutoring, including literacy training, GED preparation, and pre-vocational training, provision of books, supplies, and instructional material, and counseling or case management, works to ensure graduation and job placement, transportation, and referral to community resource for unemployed adults. The services should also include job training, minimally an associate's degree or a certificate for programs that have a demand for skilled job opportunities. Services are intended primarily for single head of households, as well as unemployed adults, elderly, low-income adults, youth, ages 18 to 28 that are at risk of homelessness, families, and rural adults. So that is a recap of the service intent for employment services for state fiscal year 2026 local plan level with an amount of $41,708. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move to the next broad service category, which is Rehabilitation Services Administration, or RSA. And you'll see that there are 2 services here. The first is interpreter service for deaf adults who need interpreter assistance in accessing needed services. And the target group is deaf adults. The state fiscal year 2026 local plan level is $23,955. And it has a service intent of to assist deaf individuals in accessing and utilizing community services, including emergency services, by providing interpreter services. And then the next one is or I'm sorry, the next service is supportive intervention and guidance counseling for, I'm going to read it as written because that's what on the slide, but I will also make a slight correction. So it's supportive intervention guidance counseling for hearing impaired persons who have problems in adjusting to their disability at work and in family and interpersonal relationships. So I'm reading it as written because this is how it was provided by the Department of Economic Security. But I would like to note that we are working to make a change in how that's written to reflect hard of hearing instead of hearing impaired persons. So just wanted to acknowledge that. So for the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level, the funding amount is $34,208. And then the service intent is to assist deaf. And again, it's written here, hearing impaired clients, but we are working to change it to hard of hearing in solving or learning to cope with their disability by providing intervention, support, and counseling. All right, so if we were to look at the cumulative amount for District 2 totals for this particular broad service category, Rehabilitation Services Administration, RSA, for state fiscal year 2026 local plan level, it is $58,163. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move to the next item, if we could. Yes, I think that concluded all of the broad service categories. So just on the off chance I was incorrect on that. All right, let's see. Close that second. All right, so we are on agenda item number 4, which is funding prioritizations and recommendations. And so I just want to kind of do a quick recap, if you will, in the sense that I think it's just important that we remember that much like when people gave presentations or spoke to different elements that were in the fact sheets that were provided during, as a part of that process during a previous subcommittee meeting, that those were opportunities to present only facts or data regarding demographics and needs and to offer a regional perspective. And as a reminder, this committee will discuss local issues and trends to determine local priorities. It will make, and that's where we're headed now, it will make recommendations for service categories, not agencies. And as a reminder, it does not review applications, reports, or have input into the state process once the plan is approved. And so just wanted to remind everyone of that. And I know there's some folks that were not a part of the previous subcommittee meeting, so they didn't really have an opportunity perhaps to have that reminder in the past, although it was sent out in the original invites to be a part of the subcommittee. All right, so I know as we begin this process, when we reflect back on the last subcommittee meeting, there were some questions that came up that we felt was important to reach out to Department of Economic Security to get some guidance or some clarification, if you will. And so I wanted to take a moment because I believe that this will serve appropriately under funding prioritizations recommendations, right? We wanted this information as part of the foundation to make these recommendations and prioritizations. So one of the questions was about what someone asked whether or not this was a competitive grant or not. And it is not a competitive grant, it's a block grant. So, and it's typically awarded based on a formula, right? So just want to make sure people were on the same page with that. There was a question about if there's a way to show how many people were helped, or at least to give some context around that with the funding in the respective service categories. And so what DES shared was that there's a post-expenditure report that's provided every year, and it usually comes out the end of December, by December 31st, if you will, of every year. So they're in the process of, still working on the current post-expenditure report, right, for this year, 2024. So we don't necessarily have that information, right, because we're not there yet. But when we want to try to find out some information about what it looks like historically, if you will, DES did share a little bit of information regarding the post-expenditure report for 2023. And they did break down the services that are supported with SSBG expenditures. So they're, as you would expect, in alignment with what we just covered, but I'll just briefly go through them. So the services supported with SSBG expenditures are adoption services, case management, congregate meals, counseling services, daycare for adults, daycare for children, education and training services, employment services, family planning services, foster care services for both adults and children, health-related services, home-based services, home-delivered meals, housing services, independent or transitional living services, information and referral, legal services, pregnancy and parenting, prevention and intervention, protective services for adults, protective services for children, recreation services, residential treatment, special services for those with a disability, special services for youth at risk, substance abuse services, transportation, and then I believe there's kind of another category. So for context, they do break down, how is it written? Their report shows the services supported with SSBG expenditures, and it goes by category of children, adults ages 59 years and younger, adults ages 60 and older, and then any adults of an unknown age. And then they give a cumulative amount of total adults. So for brevity, the total adults, if we were to go by information and referral, it's 127,850. If we went to employment services, it's 48,817. Case management, 30,749. Congregate meals, 24,053. Counseling services, 13,372. Special services for disabled, 2,489. Prevention and intervention, 16,993. And then it breaks it down even further. And if we wanted to look at total services for some of those categories, total services provided in number, right? Case management, 53,973. Congregate meals, 24,053. Counseling services, 13,372. And then daycare for children, 45,670. Employment services, 57,349. Foster care for children, 13,522. Home-based services, 6,635. It's the same as the total adult amount. Home delivered meals, 12,967. Housing services, total adults, 4,069. Total services, 6,458. Information referral was the same, 128,451 for total services. It's the same as total adults. Legal services, total 15,474. Prevention and intervention, 30,562. And then special services for disabled, 2,553. So that's kind of a quick recap of what the 2023 post-expenditure report showed. They did share that as far as funding between the different divisions for DCS, DAS, WDA, RSA, when you compare it to 2022, there was just a slight difference, but the allocations for 2024 stayed the same as 2023. And I think that is pretty much all the answers they provided for the questions that I had posed based on our most recent meeting. So I'm hopeful that might be helpful. I'm just going to do a quick check to see if anybody else joined the call before we move forward. And yes, I see Elizabeth Cozy's on, I keep saying call, the meeting. I apologize. Elizabeth Cozy's in the meeting from the United Way. So it's still morning. Good morning, Elizabeth. I wanted you to have an opportunity to introduce yourself and, of course, the organization you represent and how you serve. And I believe you also had some information that you thought would be helpful for the group to be considering as we move forward with the funding and recommendations based on the last subcommittee meeting. So I want to make sure you have that opportunity to share that. And then, of course, we'll open the floor to everyone as well. So I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce yourself, and then we'll get started.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Liz Cozy. I'm Associate Vice President of Community Development at the United Way of Tucson and Southern Arizona. And I apologize for joining late. I also apologize that United Way has kind of had different representatives in this meeting over the course of the couple, times that you have all convened. Lisa Florin has been here for the last two and wasn't able to make it today, but she and I looked carefully and talked at length about some of the previous meeting notes and conversations. So I'm sort of here to present what she saw as a methodology to perhaps consider to put a little bit of a framework around allocation of funding. And the caveat here is, we both came into this space in the last couple of years. I know a lot of the distribution of funds is based on many historical, variables, essentially. And so this is certainly not meant to upset the apple cart. But I do think what we heard is that people were looking for a data-based, community-based way to sort of assess, what divisions and what services got what proportion of funds. And so, again, this is not meant to be a takeaway that we adopt, but it's just meant to present some ideas around how some of these decisions could be come to in more of a data-informed manner. So we do have kind of a rubric that we'd love to present for the committee to review. And Janine, I don't know if you can share that or if you want me to share my screen, whatever works best.
I'm going to reach out to my IT team to see if they have it already perhaps preloaded.
Okay.
If not, we will give you the permissions to share your screen. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask my IT
Yes,
team.
we
if they
have it available, but if you feel more comfortable sharing it yourself, Ms. Cozy, I can give you control to share your screen.
Okay, whatever you prefer. Maybe if I share, I can kind of hover over things a little bit more easily.
Okay, not a problem. You have control now.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you so
welcome.
much. Okay, you're all seeing this, I trust?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. So again, just as far as a rubric, what you see represented here are the different divisions or departments, the broad category service intents, and then the next 5 columns here represent various community needs assessments that are pretty up to date. And the idea here being, if we're trying to allocate funding based on community need, community feedback, input, that this could be a way to start to see how the different services align with what the community has given various agencies feedback around their perceived priorities. So the first column here represents the Prosperity Initiative. And I think everybody's probably aware of what that is, but it's the 13 policies that have been adopted by both the county and the city of Tucson around various elements that might increase economic mobility and reduce intergenerational poverty in our region. And so basically what Lisa has done here is looked at the 13 policies, and if the particular service aligned with one of the policies, it's listed here in the column. And the second needs assessment was done by the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension, and they have 2 or 3 different pieces to that needs assessment. One is an overall ranked 20-point priority list, and then it is divided down into specific areas like health and community well-being, and then economic community and economic development. And again, randomly, she took the top 10 of each of those subcategories just to say these were kind of the things that were surfacing for community members about what they wanted to prioritize. And then the last needs assessment is the City of Tucson P-CHIP, and the top 3 priorities were grabbed from that needs assessment. So again, those pieces are up for great debate. You know, why did you choose 3 or why did you choose 10? You know, it was the line had to be drawn somewhere. So all that is to say, anything in green were either services under divisions that had high point value for matching with all these different needs assessments. And then the things in white were kind of neutral, where they were getting, you know, 3 points that aligned with the various needs assessments. And then anything in pink was kind of 2 or below. Given those point structures, here is the column that represents the initial proposed amount of funding allocation, and then a slight shift where things that didn't align with needs assessments had a reduction in their amount of funding, and those the surplus created from that reduction was reallocated to the things that highly aligned with community needs assessments. So it doesn't create an enormous shift in pots of money, but it does create some reallocation. So again, please understand, this is not United Way saying this is what we think, you know, should happen, but it is sort of a rubric that could be considered for more discussion, or just a way to come at this a little more methodically rather than just having, you know, content presented by our very great experts in the room, but without, you know, kind of considering what we know our community is kind of asking for. So questions, discussion, I'm sure there will be much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I really appreciate your time and investment for both you and Lisa putting that together and sharing it, because I think it is helpful as we lean into having richer discussions. So I'm going to definitely allow for people to ask questions and engage. And then I'm sure others that are on this particular session or meeting will have other viewpoints they would also like to share. So we're going to make sure we allow time for all of that. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up the floor, so to speak, for questions for Elizabeth. Or just comments, just to get kind of the discussion going.
And I will say this might take a minute for people to get their heads around. So if it's the type of thing where, oh, we'd like to look at this and understand it better and come back for more conversation. Janine, I don't know what our time frame is here, but I would certainly understand if that were the case. It took me a minute.
Sure. No, I respect that. You know, it is a lot to digest, and we want to make sure people have an opportunity to process it appropriately. So we do have timelines that we do have to uphold in terms of recommendations being served up to regional council. And then, of course, those recommendations, depending on what regional council decides, and of course, public input that we still have to go through after this, or additional public input after this. We still have to serve it up to DES by the end of January. So between now and the end of January, it'll come by quickly, right? So we just
Right.
want to make sure that we allow for sufficient time to still do all the next steps of the process. So
I think Tom is unmuted, so.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I don't know about the numbers and all of that, whether they're the right number or not right number. But what I do like about this is when I listened to the Prosperity Initiative before, when it was presented to the city, when it was presented to the Board of Supervisors, is that it was going to be used as something to look through. And I think that that's what you have all done here, Liz. I think that all of funding, it's not just this funding here, needs to be put through that lens. So I appreciate that. Whether the numbers are right or wrong, I think that's what I was looking for the last time. I was sitting there going, oh, we have all these things out there, yet, how does this match up to where we want to go? Because we know it's a long-term game. So I think this is a great step in that direction.
Thanks, Tom. And I will say we did consider other needs assessments like the CHNA that the Public Health Department does, but those really, what they're surfacing there is not as relevant to this. And so that's why it wasn't completely random to pick these 5 different, outside agency conducted needs assessments, but yeah, so we tried to be thoughtful about, okay, well, what is relevant and what data exists in the community right now that is current, that represents people's, wishes and desires. Oh, Bonnie's here.
Hi.
hey, Bonnie, thank you for joining us. I'm just going to go ahead and I apologize. I took a drink of water and it got the best of me. Apparently, you're not supposed to breathe and drink water at the same time. So note to self. Hi, Bonnie.
Hi,
So we're
good
going to go ahead and
morning.
allow Bonnie an opportunity to introduce herself real quickly
Okay.
and acknowledge the organization she represents and how they serve. And then we will continue the discussion that was at hand. So hi, Bonnie. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you. Bonnie Bazada. I'm with Primavera. And as many of you know, I worked on the Prosperity Initiative in partnership with many of the organizations on this call. And I apologize. I had 2:00 as my hold time, and I had already had an early meeting scheduled. So sorry to join late. But I just want to really applaud the United Way. And I know Lisa worked hard on this with Liz, because this really gives us a way to think very, rationally, methodically about what the community has evidenced as its priorities and, be able to put it through this rubric. And again, I'm all for taking time to understand this better. And, maybe people want to argue for shifts in the rubric, but I think something that really gives us a way to, to put our best thinking into this kind of model is the way to move ahead and move ahead in future years too, knowing that, some of these priorities might change, but if we have this way to at least think about the community priorities, so thank you so much for the time that it took to put into this, and I'm deeply appreciative.
Thanks, Bonnie. And as I said, I can't take a lot of credit for it. It really came from Lisa's brain. And I will also say out loud, I did a version that completely started from zero, no funding for any division. And how would that look? And of course, as you can imagine, that comes out very, very differently. And I'm not arguing for or against. Like I said, a lot of these things are baked in historically for lots of reasons that I can't pretend to know or understand. But, I think this committee probably has, a responsibility going forward to be thinking about things, critically. So this might be a step in the right direction, and maybe there's a way for us to, be thoughtful about some sort of similar rubric for next year that really does kind of start from ground zero. I certainly am not suggesting that at this late date, but it's something to talk about.
I like that idea too. I'd like to revisit that.
Well, thank you both for that perspective, and I do appreciate all the work that went into this. I don't take that lightly, and I think what's been presented is a good element as part of the bigger foundation for our discussion, and it does warrant a discussion perhaps later on in terms of like the path forward for the next state fiscal year, local plan level service intents for 2027 on what that might look like. I do want to be fair to the process in the sense that, of course, as a reminder, right, we don't advocate for any one particular target group. And we are going to discuss, local issues and determine local priorities. And we are making funding recommendations for service categories, not agencies. And of course, like I said before Bonnie was able to join us, we don't review any applications, reports, or have input into the state process once the plan is approved. So we are just embarking right now. We're starting this journey of making recommendations today on the funding allocations for Pima County for various service categories of the Federal Social Services Block Grant to the Arizona Department of Economic Security. And of course, human service organizations in Pima County can then contract with the state to provide services using these funds. There are 29 service categories under the Social Services Block Grant, but the task before us is really focused on just 8 or 9 of those, if we think about it simplistically. So the recommendations from our work and during this time together and all the meetings that have preceded this as part of this subcommittee may result in funding for agencies in state fiscal year 2026. And as you've noticed, and just as a reminder, the total amount of money available for Pima County through this particular block grant really doesn't change significantly from year to year, and it's typically around $1.4 million. So again, I appreciate everyone's contribution and contributions, because there's been several meetings preceding this one for this important work. So again, just thank you to all of you. But I do would like to just kind of allow for, others to kind of share their thoughts or ask questions. So just as a reminder, I do see Carmen Johnson on the, keep saying the call in this meeting today. Tom McKinney. I think I said Lisa Reams. I'm not sure if I didn't. Lisa, I apologize. Lisa Reams, Carmen Johnson. I think Tony Bruno's still on the call in this meeting, and same with Kristen Bitgood. So I just want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to ask questions and give thoughts or input. So if anyone would like to add any comments or ask questions based on what's been shared thus far, or just in continuation of the discussion, I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor at this time.
I have one question / comment, Elizabeth. So again, I appreciated your first comment about taking time to really process this, and that's what I'm doing, and I'm very much in that right now. But I wanted to ask, and maybe you covered this, but how exactly did you determine the points? If you could just briefly summarize that again, that would be really helpful.
Absolutely. So for example, in this column under the Prosperity Initiative, this particular division service intent of case management aligned with one of the policies in the Prosperity Initiative around housing stability, because we have case managers that are working with people to find stable housing. So it got 1 point. And then if you follow down the other community needs assessment, as long as something in that category aligned with a stated priority by our residents, then it got a point. So going across, you add up the total, and this particular division and service area ticked all the boxes. So every community needs assessment mentioned something about case management under these various categories. And so then the total point value was 5. If we looked at something like this Department of Child Safety, behavioral therapeutic activities, certainly it's not to say that isn't important. It just was not elevated or surfaced by community members in any of the needs assessments that we looked at. So it didn't come up with a point value. So that was kind of the process, if you will. And again, people could say, well, it could be weighted differently, or, there's certainly a lot of directions we could go with all of this, but that's how we arrived.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that clarification and the examples.
Of course.
I appreciate it.
I see Lisa Reams, his hand is up. So good morning, Lisa. I'm going to go ahead and open the floor for you. So go ahead.
Sure. Not a lot to share. I mostly just wanted to say thank you to Liz and to Lisa Florin for all the work they did in this. I agree with everyone that having a rubric and having a way to assess these things is incredibly helpful and useful going forward. So thank you for the work doing that. I respect. As a couple of people have said, we could try to tear it apart or disagree with different areas of it or reclassify stuff. I'm not sure where that gets us, but I just respect your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. All right. See if I see any other hands up. I apologize if I don't see your hand as quickly as I should. So I think I see Tony's hand up. So Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually appreciate this too. I'm still wrapping my head around it. And I really have no objection. I am concerned with the use of the word community so many times and what it means to each of us. And that's the only thing I will say.
Tony, I appreciate that. And I will say, when I first looked at this, I thought, well, what is the N? What's the sample size for some of these different assessments, and who was asked? And I can say a couple of things, like, for example, with the cooperative extension and the Center for the Future of Arizona also did a Gallup study that was a decade-long needs assessment, and it very much aligns with the cooperative extension. The reason we didn't put it in is it hasn't really been updated since before the pandemic, and that felt a little distant. But for example, rural areas were doubly weighted just to make sure that the concerns of, some of our less resourced communities were elevated. And beyond that, we'd have to delve into the individual needs assessments to say how many people answered surveys or were actually represented here, and kind of what was the demographic or ethnicity breakdown, those sorts of things. So we could certainly try to provide that information if it would satisfy the group to to get to a place where they're like, okay, yeah, these are the right things to be looking at. Yeah. So, but I appreciate what you're saying, and I think it is a good statement, and we should be paying attention.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Elizabeth. Let's see if anyone else has their hand up for a comment or a question. Mr. McKinney, not to put you on the spot, that's not my intention, but I know you had some questions and comments earlier, and then people joined the call, and I was trying to make sure that I fit people in. And then of course I was choking on water, so that wasn't all that helpful for me as a facilitator. I just want to make sure that you didn't get cut short. And if there was a question that was still kind of lingering, or you didn't get to ask, or perhaps didn't get answered fully, I just wanted to make sure you had the time to kind of circle back.
Yeah, no, I had no question. I just really liked, again, similar to Lisa's comments, appreciated the work that Liz and Lisa did at the United Way. And I love at least we're starting to look through a lens at stuff. Because there's too many groups like this that, you know, it's the same old. I think that was my issue last time. Are we just doing it over and over again because, you know, it's easy? And so this makes it a little more challenging, I think. But I think that's what we're here for. So I just appreciate that we got to look at it sliced a little differently.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. McKinney. I appreciate that. So it's going to sound like I'm putting people on the spot, but that's really not my intent. I just want to make sure that everyone does have an opportunity to ask questions or contribute. So just in case, Carmen or Kristen, if you had any other questions or comments, I want to make sure I didn't miss your hand, because sometimes people can have their hand up and I just don't see it in time. So in case I missed either of you.
No, this is Carmen. I don't have any questions. I just want to thank you for, again, putting together a very informative session. And I think all my questions have been answered.
Thank you. And then Kristen, I know you had a question earlier about, you know, the point allocation, like the 5, 4, 3, as if it's like a weighted kind of component, if you will, how that came to pass or what that looked like. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't, you know, any other questions or comments that you might have had that might have been interrupted with what I was sharing earlier.
Okay. No, I don't have any other questions. It's just been extremely informative. And yes, I very much echo the group's sentiment about all of the work that Elizabeth, you've done with the United Way, and it's very much appreciated, and I look forward to delving more into it. Thank you.
So I'm just gonna kind of throw it out there. Where are we as a group in terms of moving forward with getting to make any kind of recommendations or prioritization? What questions do still need to be asked? What conversations still need to be had so that we can be, you know, obviously intentional with our time, but also be responsible for the task that's before us. So just going to throw that out there to the group. I guess the bigger question is, are we comfortable making any kind of recommendations at this juncture? Or are there things that we still need to discuss, ask,
So
process?
our choices, you know, what we look.
I'm sorry, Tony, I think it cut out for a second. I apologize. If you could say that one more time.
He's frozen.
He's
Yeah.
frozen.
Yeah, I think he has some connectivity challenges, probably based on where he might be at. So we'll give him a few more minutes to try to circle back. So
Janine, I wonder if
yes.
do you think it would be, oh, I'm sorry, Bonnie had her hand raised. I just saw that. I
Go ahead.
apologize. I was just gonna say, would it be helpful to ask people by a show of hands if they want more time to digest this information or want more details?
I think it would be helpful. I'm just gonna let Bonnie, she does have her hand up, say what she wanted to say when she put her hand up, and then we can do just what you said. So
Yeah,
Bonnie, go ahead.
I think that's a good way to go. I think in the last meeting I had proposed about $150,000 in a shift in funding from different categories, and I think Lisa's and Liz's analysis here is less. It looks like it's maybe 20,000 or something like that.
I think it comes to about 80 when you add up
Or
everything.
30,000. 80,000? Oh, okay. I'm just looking at the proposed funding difference for the green, because that's all that shows up there. And that's about 30,000. But to the question on the table, yeah, there's been two different proposals. This one has a wonderful rubric behind it. So maybe we do need time to kind of digest this and come back and, you know, have one more meeting.
Okay. So I'm just gonna do like a quick poll, if you will, of how many people feel that that would be beneficial or that they have a need for that first, and then I could also do a show of hands of how many people feel comfortable making some kind of step towards a recommendation today. So let's see, let's go with the first question is needing more time and having another meeting, which we would have to calculate a timeline for, right? So we can still do all the other pieces, the larger public input comment period that's required. It still has to go to regional council and then still be sent to DES following. So I want to make sure we adhere to those timelines. So let's do show of hands. How many people would benefit or value a second meeting? Or I shouldn't say a second meeting, a following meeting. See if I see any hands here. I see one. Let's see if I see any others. Two. Okay, so I see, I'm not trying to point people out, but just to make sure I'm not missing anyone. I see Bonnie and Elizabeth would find value in another meeting. Anyone
Kristen
else?
also has her hand up,
Kristen,
Janine.
okay, all right, thank you, Kristen. All right.
Tom's back.
Can we see how Tom votes since he's coming back in?
Yeah, Tom, the poll at hand was how many, getting a sense of how many people would find value in having another meeting to allow for more time to process this information and discern any other questions before moving forward with recommendations. And so I'd ask people if they felt like it would be of value to have yet another meeting, given the time constraints that we still have to talk through, right? Because we have a public comment period that we have to adhere to, has to go to regional council, and then we still have to meet DES's timelines. And I also want to be sensitive to the time of year that it is, right? And
Right.
people's calendars and priorities, et cetera. So with all that being said, just want to get everyone's input on it as to whether or not they would find value in doing another meeting. So Tom, would you find value in another meeting?
You know,
I
I would participate in another meeting. I don't know that I'd find value in another meeting because I don't think that, you know, the amounts aren't going to change drastically. I don't think. When our internet went out at the appropriate time, I have no idea what you heard or not. Is the choice either maybe the what Liz has presented or what we talked about last time, which is basically just staying the same? Is that really, that's our choices, I think.
Well, Tom, last time I proposed $150,000 shift in categories.
Okay.
Yeah, there's different thoughts and considerations that have been posed. So to echo what Bonnie said, and a little bit to what you said, you know, one is leave the amounts as is. One is the thought that Bonnie had shared about making a shift of, I think it was about 150,000. And then Elizabeth has shared some data, some context, and a potential rubric to use to give some consideration about how we might make recommendations or how we could use this tool to make recommendations. So I guess you could say the third or fourth option would be, this is the third as it is shown on the screen. And a fourth would be, you know, what are the other options? What other recommendations does the subcommittee feel might be appropriate? So
then I'll change my answer a little. Is I missed, I caught the end of Bonnie's thing at the last meeting because I had to step out for a second. So I didn't know the amount, nor do I know the categories of that shift. So I think if we're to consider that, I would need more time. I think if you're asking me to consider this, what I'm looking at today, or what I would say stagnant, staying the same, I would be ready to make a recommendation today. But if we're going to consider the 150, I would need a little more time because I don't know what categories those were in.
Well, would it be helpful if Bonnie did a recap of, not to put you on the spot, Bonnie, but would it be helpful if Bonnie was able or willing to do a recap of that
Sure.
recommendation or thought from the last meeting? Because we do have people such as Kristen that were not able to attend the last meeting, and I think Elizabeth, wasn't in that meeting either, although Lisa Florin stood in her place. So to be fair to Elizabeth as well, it might be helpful for Elizabeth to hear it firsthand.
Absolutely. And I just have, before going there, I'm just curious for Tony, Carmen, and Lisa, you want to get it done today? And I'm curious as to what it is that your position is: to keep the status quo, to go with the rubric, to do something else?
Yeah, so Tony and Carmen, I didn't have an opportunity yet to ask you if you had a thought on whether or not you'd find value in a next meeting. But perhaps your decision, much like Tom's, weighs in understanding what Bonnie had shared. And I don't know that Carmen was at the last meeting to have heard it. I believe Tony was. So I was thinking perhaps before they weigh in on their thoughts about another meeting, is maybe just go ahead, Bonnie, if you don't mind, and restate what you had shared in the last meeting. This way, I think for the most part, all of us that are in this meeting today are on equal footing, because we will all have the same information, meaning what you had recommended, what Elizabeth shared today, and of course, we have the information that would suggest another option, which is to leave things as they sit, and then also, the discussion as to, is there a fourth option, if you will. So if that's
Sure.
appropriate, I'll go ahead and let Bonnie share that.
And so I would just say that my rationale was sort of similar to what the rubric is showing, which is that, more than half of the current allocation is for the division around services to seniors, and that given what these different assessments show are the current needs in the community, that it would make sense to shift funds. And I was advocating for 4 funding areas to receive additional funds, and I can put that on the screen, potentially at least. And it really just came down to doubling the expenses. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to expand my screen so that everybody can, when I put it up,
I think I'm going to
can
ask the
see
IT
it.
team to give you permissions to share. I don't know if you have the permissions just yet.
Oh, it looks like I might. Let me give it a shot.
All right, let me know if you need it.
Hang on just a minute.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So I'll try sharing. And here we go. So here are the 4 areas: supportive intervention, legal assistance for civil legal issues, emergency shelter, and housing support services. Just doubling the current funding as you see it here, and there's the doubling with the recommended changes, which comes out to about 150 ballpark in funding. So that's what I was proposing last week, without the advantage of the rubric, but yeah, so that was what I put out there.
Okay. Thank you, Bonnie. I'm going to allow it to be up on the screen for a little bit longer. I do see Lisa Ream's hand, so I want to make sure I acknowledge that. So go ahead, Lisa.
I'm just a point of clarification. So this shows a recommended change of $300,000. but 150 of it is being earmarked for other services, and the other 150 was up for discussion where it would be shown. So that's just a clarification from, you said it's $150,000 change. I believe the recommended change was $300,000 to come away from older adult services to go to other areas, with 150 specifically earmarked here and 150 to yet to be determined where it might be earmarked. So I just want to clarify that for the group, unless I'm misunderstanding that.
I see Elizabeth's hand up, so I'm going to get to Elizabeth in just a moment, but to be fair for everyone that's in the meeting, to make sure we do have an accurate understanding of what is meant here. Bonnie, if you could just maybe go through it just one more time and make sure that everyone has the clarity around that in reference to what Lisa was asking for clarification around.
Lisa, I think my feeling is really this 150. To me, that's what I can advocate for, is I think these 4 categories. And I'd like to say too, that we know that there are older adults who are going to be positively impacted by, in all of these areas. We know whether it's housing supportive services, which I know PCOA does, and emergency shelter, right? So it's not that seniors are not going to be getting served. It's just that there's a refocus. So my position would be to support 150 shift into these 4. Potentially, I mean, I'm very interested in looking at the rubric more and giving that consideration, but I was asked to recap from the last meeting, and so that's what that is.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify though that this is only a portion of what you originally presented. So what you're saying then is you're changing the original presentation to say the other 150,000 isn't really as important to me. I really just want to advocate for this part of it.
That's right. And if there are other people on the call who want to see other reallocations, please put it out there. But I'd advocate for this 150.
Does that help, Lisa? I want to be fair to you because it was your question. Is that helpful?
Yes, I know that we were originally talking about removing $300,000 from older adult services, and this is half that. So I just wanted to understand where that shift in thinking came from, since what's on the screen is different than the wholeness of what was presented originally. That's all. So yes. Okay.
All right. So Bonnie, you're comfortable with that? That's accurate. Okay. All right. So if everyone has a sound understanding of that, that would be great. If there's questions, we definitely want people to have an opportunity to ask them. I do see Elizabeth's hand up. So I'm going to ask Elizabeth to go ahead and have the floor, but then I want to make sure I'm intentional about circling back if there was any questions based on Bonnie's presentation, because I wanted to be fair to her. I mean, she did put time and thought into this, and if you have questions, it's appropriate for you to have time to ask them. So go ahead, Elizabeth.
Part of my question was already answered. Thank you. I was trying to understand these 2 columns of funding and which one we were considering, or both. So I think you have all addressed that. And I will say, at first I was thinking, looking at the other rubric, well, a couple of these things maybe scored a little lower. And I want to say out loud, we as a state and as a county have a higher older adult dependency ratio than the national average. All that really means is that for the number of people 65 and older that are being supported by working people, our burden is higher than other communities. And it just means there's a higher drain on the working folks in the community to kind of support older adults and children for that matter. But it's generally considered more detrimental, I guess, to have a higher older adult dependency ratio, because older adults require more expensive healthcare, more expensive social services compared to children, particularly if you're considering like long-term care needs. However, as Bonnie pointed out, just because the money is shifting to these other categories doesn't mean we're saying older adults can't be served over here. So that was a helpful reminder to think about it that way. If we're putting more money into legal assistance, folks that are 50 and older are going to access those services. They might just be doing it through a different mechanism. So thank you for that. It's a long-winded commentary, but it's just what was on my mind.
I'm gonna go ahead and see if anyone had any questions for Bonnie pertinent to what she shared. And then just other thoughts, circling back to whether or not we would like to throw up the potential for another meeting on the table, or if we're comfortable at this juncture beginning to make some recommendations. So first, let's see if there's any other questions for Bonnie or clarification that might be needed. And then we'll see what our thoughts are at this juncture about potentially another meeting. So are there any other questions for Bonnie based on what she shared?
Janine, can I just add that part of the rationale for this is which population suffers poverty at the highest rate, right? And older adults are in the lowest category for poverty. Children and family, particularly families with children, are in a higher poverty rate. So just, trying to grasp this analytically and thinking about where's the greatest need in the community, that was part of what also drove this suggestion.
Okay, thank you for that.
Bonnie, is it significant? Is the number significantly different that seniors suffer less poverty than families with children? I mean, what's the?
Let me see if I can pull it up. Can I stop sharing my screen here and I'll see if I can find that.
Absolutely.
And I'll just say on the chart that's on the screen, this is helpful, but without looking at it in the total, like where it would come from, it's hard for me to do that today then. It's because, Lisa's saying it's all coming from adult older services or the 300. And again, so I don't know where that 150 is coming from.
I'm going to ask my IT team to, in a moment, to put up the Division of Aging and Adult Services, broad service category.
I think I have it. I can put it up.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. This is the, where's adult services? Oh, you know what? I didn't. Sorry. I just clipped this one.
Okay. I'll ask my IT team if they can go ahead and pull up the Division of Aging and Adult Services, or perhaps just the general slide deck, and we can scroll to that appropriate section. Great. Thank you so much. They make me look flawless. They just magically make all the stuff appear. So I'm grateful to them. All right. So here it is, the Division of Aging and Adult Services, and you'll see the different categories. So I'll let Bonnie kind of compare and contrast what we're seeing here relative to her proposal. And then I do see Elizabeth's hand up. So Bonnie, if you could go ahead and kind of talk us through it in terms of like where the monies might come from out of these particular services and where they might land based on your
I have no
process that you shared.
I have no analysis. I just know where I want it to land. So this is not my expertise, and I would ask the group, if there's interest. And I would just say too, right now, sort of the two. I think this marries up pretty closely with what the rubric is that United Way did in terms of the shift from where to where. Theirs is about 30,000, right, Liz? So last time I recommended 150. So maybe there's another option on the table, but I would defer to our experts in aging. My expertise is more in like the categories that I'm recommending. That's where my research is. So I don't have a recommendation other than from somewhere from this total fund of pulling 150 out.
Okay. So you didn't necessarily say 150 straight from case management or 150 straight from home care or any other kind of ratio. You just in a general sense.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I see Lisa's hands up. But I know Elizabeth's hands up was first. I'm trying to do it in order. So Elizabeth, if you go ahead, and then as soon as Elizabeth, when you're finished, I'll call on Lisa.
I I wanted to address Tom's question about poverty rates. And just a quick search shows for Pima County that the child poverty rate is hovering around 16%, and it looked like older adults was around 11. Bonnie, you probably know better, but that's what my quick search just produced, just so we know what we're talking about in terms of the difference.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate that. Lisa Reams?
Yeah, I can't speak to the overall poverty rates at all. I don't have any of that data, but I know that for the Division of Aging and Adult Services and the services that are contracted on the county level, that their requirement is that they serve people in the greatest social and economic need. And actually 80% of the older adults receiving those services are under 150% federal poverty level. So you might be talking, it's a bit of comparing apples and oranges when you're talking about there's lots of older adults that are doing great. Those aren't the ones we're serving with these funds.
Yeah, so I think context is important, right? So obviously, in order to benefit from these services, you have to meet specific criteria. And to Lisa's point, by extension, those people are meeting a poverty standard, right? So they are within that. Now, I think Bonnie was trying to articulate what percentage of the population I think is being served that experiences a poverty rate, whether it be child or adults. Is that accurate, Elizabeth? Is that what we're saying?
That's just the general poverty rate in Pima County for
Okay.
both adults and young and children. Okay. It just occurs to me, would it be helpful for this group if Bonnie and I, or Bonnie and Lisa and I, got together and looked at her suggestions and tried to apply the kind of rubric thinking to it to get to that bigger picture of from where to where and what the actual end amounts would be?
I'll leave that to the group. So I'll let the group weigh in.
I feel like that's what we're trying to do as a larger group. I'm not sure why there's a subgroup meeting to talk about it.
No, yeah, to your point, Lisa, just to put it in the chart and break it down, it's a little bit hard to do as we're sitting here. So just offering that help, but if it feels like it should be, maybe we can do it online together.
So Elizabeth, would you be comfortable if it was helpful to the group using the tool that you have to illustrate, I guess you could say?
Let me see if I can get a live version of it.
What Bonnie was communicating, just so that people could see perhaps I guess you could say the impact. Because I think it is important to have that clarification in terms of if the group was to move any amount of money, whether it be $1 or $150,000, where it's coming from specifically and where it's going to. Because each of the service intents have a very specific intent, right? That's how they're written. So the impact will change from where it's taken and where it goes to by extension of that. I'm going to make sure I'm not missing any hands. Okay.
If you want to allow me to share, I could do that.
I'm going to ask my IT team to go ahead and give you those permissions.
Maybe I do. Maybe it was just that something else was being shared. Let's see.
You might still have them.
All right. So what you were looking at before was a PDF, so it couldn't be edited, and this is just the live spreadsheet. So sorry, let me try to make a couple adjustments so that people can see things a little more clearly.
Thank you for doing this. I think it is helpful for
Yeah.
whatever discussions that are made around this, that everyone who's in the meeting today gets to actively participate and see it in motion. And just in the interest of time as well. So.
And sorry as I fiddle, but try to just make things a little more legible for folks.
That's fine. I'm gonna try to not choke on water for a moment, so I'm gonna turn my camera off.
Okay. So I think maybe Bonnie, what would be helpful is if you can tell me the 4 areas that you wanted shifts to go to, we could highlight them. Maybe that would be a way to start. I know emergency shelter was one.
Yeah. Emergency shelter was one. Is that okay? You got that one? Housing support services under the CAD category. Do you see that?
I think, is that this guy?
Yeah, good.
Mhm.
12. Legal assistance for civil. I think that's 4, line 4.
Oh, okay. It shows up a
Oh.
couple places.
Oh, no, it's like, sorry, you had 11 was correct. It's
Okay.
11. I wonder if Lisa meant to switch 4 and 11. I don't know, because that one is specifically for domestic violence, and 11 is more generic.
Mm.
And I would guess that the alignment with these assessments, certainly with the Prosperity Initiative, we don't address domestic violence, so it would have been up in the number 4 in terms of prioritization. And then supportive intervention in CAD, which is where it might be 8.
Crisis intervention? No.
Yeah, it might be. I think I have to find see if I can find the original sheets. Yes, that you got the right one.
Okay. And so I guess we're not 100% clear on the legal assistance, but this one says civil and landlord tenant. So is that what you were thinking of?
There are 2.
Mm-hmm.
One is for domestic violence and one is generic. And what I'm advocating for is the generic one, which, is more likely, for example, to serve seniors. Civil legal matters for low-income residents. It's, maybe if we look at funding levels, that funding level is only at 19,216 right now.
Okay, so that's this one. This number 11.
I wonder why it's in there twice.
Well, this one's got a different
Oh,
funding
yeah,
level.
I see it. I gotcha. Never mind.
So this must be a different category.
I think maybe she's got it in twice for some reason.
Well, it's got a different funding level. So are there 2 different funding level
Yeah,
services?
you're right. There is. Okay, there is a third one here at 28.6. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that one is not, it includes domestic situations, but it is not specific. So maybe then we should highlight 4.
So,
Yeah, yeah.
in
And
this,
you can take the highlight off of the 19-216. So 11, line 11, you can take the highlight off.
okay.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, you got them. Thank
That
you.
right? Yeah, you bet. And so in this scenario, legal assistance is already getting a bump. It's not a lot, but 40% of the surplus. The crisis intervention is neutral, housing is neutral, and emergency shelter went down only because it doesn't really show up in as many of the needs assessments. Although I suppose you could argue that it's really not housing stability because it's emergency shelter, right? So I think I wouldn't categorize it that way. And so maybe folks can walk through how like Bonnie, what was the amount you felt, for example, number 15 needed to be increased by?
I just doubled them. So I can give you an amount, but that was, basically that was the logic, just double them.
So I'm going to let others weigh in on that. Right, because I guess the other thing to consider or try to understand is double that coming from where?
I was not attempting to make that determination other than I felt for equity issues, it would come out of what now exceeds half the budget, which is the category for older adults.
Again, this is just me. I'm sorry, it's kind of brain dump moment, but part of what we're doing with, say, this home care for older adults category is prevention, right? If we don't have these services keeping people in their homes, they're going to end up in emergency shelter. So sure, you're going to end up serving them there. But I think you'd rather serve them in the upstream sense than in the crisis moment. Does that reasoning seem sound to anybody?
Makes sense to me.
That is the entire purpose of the case management for in-home care services for older adults, is trying to help them remain stable in their current housing as long as possible.
As I'm looking at the P-CHIP plan, because I was trying to find a little more detail about, that's probably one of the more recent sort of surveys. And, going through their 100+ pages or whatever, but people do say that the vast majority wanted a 50-50 split between alleviating and preventing poverty. So, and with the next level down to going toward preventing poverty. And one of their categories for housing program services, there's 2 listed, and homeowner assistance programs and legal eviction protection programs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will say they do list homelessness as the second highest challenge in creating equitable access to opportunity. Lack of affordable housing is first. Homelessness is second. Crime and safety is third. Poverty is fourth.
Right.
I can put it on the screen if people want to see it.
Well, and you can see there, those are the top three and they're all here in this column.
Well, except emergency shelter would move up higher. It's the second one on this particular survey, I would just say.
Well, and so Bonnie, you make a good point, but remember, like if a category got a point for something, it isn't ranked. These are not
Yeah.
in order of
Gotcha.
and maybe that's a thing. So
It does show up in the P-CHIP, yeah, in the top priorities there, I see. Well,
you know, I guess my brain keeps going back to so much of what we've been talking about is the cost effectiveness of keeping people where they are versus the, you know, let's intervene in a crisis. And so I do feel like taking from a category that's keeping people housed, keeping people, you know, stable, feels a little bit counterintuitive. And so, but I don't know if there's any other place where you would say, the funding level is already so small there, we're not going to take it. I understand what you're saying. There's a big chunk of change. But I think bang for your buck, you're probably getting a lot more out of this upstream kind of approach. I don't know. I'm going to stop talking because I feel like I'm taking up way too much airspace here.
Janine, maybe we just need to do a survey of like, because I feel like I don't have a sense of the whole. Do people either are people just want the status quo, or do they want something different? And if they want something different, then we can, you know, figure out how we noodle into that, and does it require a second meeting? But if people are feeling like we want to leave the way it is, then that's a whole different conversation and a different, you know, a different vote or however we're going to do this.
Are you proposing a vote on one or the other, or just more discussion?
Yeah, I'm just curious, Lisa, to get a sense of the whole. Who, you know, there's really a fork in the road here. Do people want to leave it as is, or do they want to change it? If they want to change it, then we could spend time doing that. But if the majority want to leave it as is, then we're wasting our time, right?
Sure.
Janine, I apologize. You're muted at the moment.
My IT reminded me that I was talking into mute. So there we go. There's my day. Coughing on water, talking into mute. This is going to be an interesting day. What I was going to say was, I think Bonnie's question is appropriate, right? We need to kind of get a sense of where the group sits right now. Or are we leaning towards just leaving the funding recommendations as written by DES? Or are we looking to make some kind of a change? And if so, what might that change look like? With that, I think Elizabeth's point towards the end where she's saying, and I don't want to misquote you, Elizabeth, so please chime in and correct me on this, but my general understanding was that it's important to be mindful of kind of the long-term impact of something. So if it's helpful to leave people where they are and in a stable environment, if that saves the region in the long run from moving funding elsewhere, and now people might have to actually move out of a stable environment, that would be something that would be important for the group to consider. Is that somewhat what you were sharing, Elizabeth? Okay, so back to Bonnie's question. Is the group leaning towards leaving the recommendations as written by DES, given all the particulars that we've been talking about? Or is the group leaning towards making some kind of a change and we just have to figure out what that change is? Where does the group sit so far based on everything we've shared and discussed? I'm just gonna keep it like a poll. So how many people are in favor of, or leaning towards, I shouldn't say in favor, how many people are leaning towards leaving the recommendations as is? Because to Bonnie's point, if the majority of the people are just leaning towards leaving it as is, then we don't need to continue the discussion. But if the majority of the people are leaning towards, yes, I would like to see some kind of a change, and we just haven't figured out what that change is, then we need to continue the conversation. So how many people are leaning towards just leaving the recommendations as is, just for me to get a sense of that? We could do show of hands or something that would be helpful to me if people are leaning towards leaving it as is. Okay, I don't see any hands up for leaving it as is. Am I accurate on that? Okay, so now what remains is what change and to what extent. I just want to remind the group that one option, so to speak, is to have multiple options as recommendations for regional council, saying, you know, option one, our recommendation is X, Y, and Z. Secondary recommendation would be A, B, and C, and serve those recommendations up to regional council as such. Or it could just be, this is our recommendation, and whatever it is, it is. Keep in mind, there's still a public input process that will be had. And then, of course, these recommendations, whatever they might be, will go to regional council, and regional council makes that decision. So I just want to put that out there, as it looks like the group is leaning towards trying to make some kind of recommendation that's different than what DES has right now. So thoughts on what change, if any, the group might want to explore?
I'd be curious to hear whether people feel like they're in favor of moving the direction that that Liz and Lisa Florin put the work into to have a rubric to look at this year and going forward. And just from that same standpoint of how are people leaning? Are people comfortable saying, let's move in that direction? Can we?
So let's do that. How many people are comfortable with using the I'm going to call it rubric in lack of a better word, but the tool that Elizabeth and Lisa and her team put together as a vehicle for making the recommendations? How many people are comfortable with that? Just show of hands, comfort level. People comfortable? Okay. Let me see if I'm capturing everyone. Is anyone not comfortable with it? Let me look for hands for people that are not comfortable with it. Okay, unless I'm mistaken, I don't see anyone that's not comfortable with using this. So I'm going to go with the group is comfortable with using this tool. If I am mistaken, please correct me now. Okay, so looks like the group is comfortable using this as a tool for discussion to come up with some recommendations. So I'll let the group continue the conversation on coming up with recommendations. And Elizabeth, just because this is your worksheet and you're the only one that can kind of drive it, I'm going to extend some of the skills to you in terms of navigating, but I'll still do my part in trying to champion the facilitation piece and ensuring all voices are heard. So thank you for driving, so to speak. Bonnie, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so my next question would just be, do we want to try to come to a solution using this rubric today, or to give it a little more time? Because I do have questions. I think it's fabulous, but one, I'm looking at a very small screen, seeing it for the first time. And then I have questions about it. For example, line 5, interpreter services for deaf adults, you know, that feels misplaced to me, for example. So I just feel like I've got some questions on the overall rubric. So do we want to, you know, what do we want to do with the rest of today? And are we driving toward a decision today, or are we going to need another meeting to get there?
That's a good question. I think Tony has his hand up, so I'm gonna ask Tony for his thoughts, comments, and then I will circle back with the question that Bonnie had for the group, and I also see Tom's hand up. So in order, so to speak, we'll go with Tony, then Tom, and then I'll circle back to Bonnie's question as appropriate.
Well, mine is real simple. I have another meeting in about 5 minutes. And so regardless, I'll be signing off.
Okay. Did you have any questions or comments in addition to that before potentially signing off in 5 minutes? Tony?
I would just say I'd like some time to look at it a little closer, more than anything else.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then Tom McKinney.
Yeah, I agree. I would need more time and I'd like to see it. Like I agree that it's super small on the screen, so it's a little hard to read it. So I would need more time.
Okay.
It would be helpful if you could email it to us.
Janine, do we have, are there rules about that? Does it need to come through you? I'm just thinking the version we sent is a PDF, so it couldn't be edited, but we could do a locked Excel spreadsheet so that people can, you know, make it larger and be able to spread out the columns and those sorts of things, which you're not going to be able to do in the PDF.
I will need to do some research on that, to what extent we're allowed to use external tools and how it gets distributed, just to make sure that we are following the process appropriately. And then whatever that is, we can champion that. Bonnie, I see your hand up.
Yeah, and if we could get that, I mean, I'd love to see if we could maybe also get it in a Excel format. So if we wanted to play with numbers, you know, we could do that. And maybe then we could also, through you, Janine, send a list of questions that we would like addressed next time, so that when Liz and Lisa present, they know kind of specifically, you know, what we're kind of where we have questions that might accelerate the process in the next meeting.
So just to clarify, are you saying, well, have the subcommittee members that are on the meeting today send questions to me to be able to provide it to Elizabeth from the United Way and Lisa Reams from PCOA? Is that what I'm hearing?
Lisa Florin, who created this rubric.
Oh, okay.
Obviously, you know, we'd all be looking at it, but since United Way created this, like I have a question, as I mentioned on line 5, how the interpretive services for deaf adults fits that, ranks that high. That's something I'm seeing that I have a question, and I think it would help Liz and Lisa prepare for the next meeting and keep it flowing if we could get our questions to them in advance.
Okay. No, I think that's a good recommendation. I've been making some notes on that for questions so that we can make sure we have to get those to Elizabeth and Lisa as appropriate. All right. So, so since it looks like when I say we, the group is asking for another meeting to be able to have more time to process, discern what questions still remain to be asked, allow for time to look at the information that was presented by Elizabeth and Lisa. They're going to try to assemble another meeting. Since PAG has a lot of public meetings, I need to look at our calendar to see what dates and times might be appropriate. So at this juncture, I would like to propose that I find out some date and time options and then propose those to the group. And then the group can say where are we landing in terms of the vast majority of us being able to attend, or at least send someone from your organization on your behalf. Because you would have the lens of the questions that were going to be posed, et cetera. And then we could move forward with that meeting. The meeting might need to take place very quickly in relationship to today. So I'm just throwing that out there, given not only the timetable that we have to honor, but also what the weeks look like for a lot of people with their own personal lives and work commitments now through the end of the year. So we're going to try really hard to find the balance on all of that. So I'm hopeful we can find a date and time that'll work well for everyone. I'll do my best. That's all I can promise, is I will do my best. So we'll see. So look for an email from me with some proposed dates and times. Look for an email from me saying I need those questions. And then Elizabeth and Lisa, I will circle back with you on what's the rules of engagement with regarding that tool, but also the questions for the group. If we can't necessarily send the tool as a locked spreadsheet, if we have to do it some other way, I can communicate that to the group as well. So any other loose ends that we feel need to be wrapped up in a bow before we adjourn or potentially adjourn today's meeting? I don't see any other hands up. All right. Okay, so with that in mind, let me go ahead and ask my IT team to bring up the next item on the agenda. And the next item on the agenda is adjournment. So I know we went 1 minute over, but I feel like we did have a lot of good questions and commentary about the path forward. And I think we are doing our due diligence by having another meeting. So we will work on those things that I already articulated. And as of right now, unless there's any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn today's meeting at 12:02 p.m. on November 21st, 2024. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time, and we will talk soon. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.